William, thank you so much. So the letter from the lawmakers came out, I think it was on the 9th of July. Talk to me about how much sway these lawmakers have. Is there growing support for their stance? Because we've just heard Naledi Pandor, our international relations minister, suggesting that she knows who these guys are and they're not necessarily that friendly. So perhaps trying to downplay it. But is there growing support for what they're suggesting?
This is certainly a concern, and it comes from some prominent members out of both sides of US lawmakers, both Democrats and Republicans, included in those that signed off on this letter that was sent to US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, as well as other prominent members of the Biden administration. It was signed by the likes of Chris Coons, who's a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, as well as the Republican top member of that same committee, Jim Reich, as well. So these are senior lawmakers, some of whom that have penned this letter expressing this concern that states that they deem South Africa should be in danger of losing AGOA benefits. Of course, that absolutely crucial trade partnership that the African continent, many members of the African continent share with the United States, that of course is so vital to South African interests. And really this stems from a range of issues, Sally, when it comes to, of course, that alleged docking of this ship in South Africa that allegedly took Russian, that was supplied with South African weapons taken to Russia, or at least that is the accusation from some US lawmakers. And of course, the hosting of Vladimir Putin at the BRICS summit, which you mentioned as well, and really generally seen as that fear of the cozy relationship, especially militarily, between South Africa and Russia. So that is a huge concern in Washington. Of course, there is precedent. Just last year, the US expelled 3 African nations from this trade bloc. So of course, there certainly is precedent.
Yeah, and the letter is quite strongly worded, and it says it notes South Africa's non-aligned stance, but essentially the letter is saying we don't buy it because of the things you say and the things that you do, essentially. I suppose if the president addresses this, if Joe Biden says something, then this is really going to be a massive issue. Has there been any communication from the White House itself? Is anything expected on this issue?
Not from the White House directly. We have heard, though, from the US State Department. We've heard from a State Department spokesperson who says that they share congressional concerns about South Africa's security relationship with Russia. So that really does show that this is going up the branches of government here in the United States, and will ultimately be discussed prominently in the Biden administration, because of course for months now we've really seen somewhat of a charm offensive by the United States to try and corral the likes of South Africa, to really cozy up with them instead of Russia trying to persuade the likes of South Africa that they have a better bet, essentially siding with Washington and its allies with regard especially to Ukraine, rather than siding with Russia. Of course, we've seen that recently when it comes to geopolitics, with the US's charm offensive with India, more military trade deals being done there. Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, is expected in Washington in just a few days' time. So that's another example of the US looking to try and splinter some of those BRICS nation relationships away from Moscow. And of course, we've seen the carrot from the Biden administration trying to persuade the likes of the extension of the AGOA and the benefits that could bring South Africa. But now, perhaps with these lawmakers sending this letter to President Biden and his administration, perhaps this is a sign from some lawmakers that maybe it's time to use the stick approach as well.
So the other thing that's developed today is the news that this flight training school here in Oudtshoorn in South Africa, the Test Flying Academy of South Africa, which essentially trains pilots, has been put on a sanctions list by, I think it's the US Commerce Department. Just how serious is this? What does it actually mean?
Absolutely. This is a message that allegedly posed a risk to American national security interests. And from the flight school, they say it won't impact their day-to-day operations, so very much playing down this incident. But of course, in the wider context, what we've seen just in the last few days alone, Sally, really, is the US taking more of a significant step when it comes to clamping down, especially on jet pilot training, as they deem it to be a national security risk. We've seen the US put more sanctions on entities doing things like training Chinese pilots. So this is part of a wider push being played out around the world. And of course, significantly, this just comes a few days before US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is set to visit Beijing. And of course, relations between the two superpowers has been deteriorating in recent months, so there's certainly hope that this meeting will help ease these tensions. But it certainly appears that these latest sanctions are an extension of this wider push from Washington to try and shore up national security. Of course, we had the surveillance balloon over parts of the United States just a few weeks ago, as this continued threat, or at least the perceived threat as far as Washington is concerned, about Chinese espionage continues.
All right, well, thank you so much for that update. That's our correspondent in New York, William Denselow. And we did try and get hold of this flight school in Oudtshoorn. Haven't had any success as yet, but they have issued a media release. I'll read you parts of it. They say that they are disappointed that the United States Department of Commerce took this step without consulting with them. TFASA has operated with the full knowledge of NATO defense and security agencies for over a decade. They're going to be contacting the US Department of Commerce to clarify their position. And it seems that the concern from the United States side is that if they train Chinese pilots or there's cooperation with China, it's about trading information. So this is what the flight school has to say. They say that they've got strict protocols and a code of conduct in place designed to prevent any TFASA employee sharing information or training that is or might be considered to be legally or operationally sensitive or security classified. Their training materials are open source documents all provided directly by the clients. They say that they have always been in full compliance with the laws of South Africa and every other jurisdiction within which they operate. So it's really of some concern that they have now been sort of issued with this trade sanction. And they say that, of course, they've been operating with the full knowledge of NATO defense and security agencies for over a decade. So that's a story that's still got a lot of information still to come out to understand exactly why the United States has taken the stance that it has. It is perhaps an indication of how sensitive the United States is getting to anyone who has relations with Russia or indeed with China.